When you get on the tour, you want to win your first title. Once you've done that, maybe you want to win your sort of first big title, maybe it's Master Series, and the next thing is winning a Grand Slam. And usually you have to take it step by step, because being number one, it means that you need to probably win a lot of big titles plus a couple of Grand Slams. But I felt I was getting close there at one point, and I managed in the end, at 24 years of age. Started playing with Connors, McEnroe, which I watched on television, and then obviously with Sampras, Courier and Becker. My biggest rivalry was with Boris Becker, obviously playing 3 Wimbledon finals, and that's what people remember the most.
From 1988 to 1990, Wimbledon's center court became the stage for one of tennis's most intense rivalries, Stefan Edberg versus Boris Becker. 3 straight years, 3 finals, 2 completely different worlds colliding. Becker was raw power, diving, roaring, and pounding serves like thunder. Edberg was pure elegance, gliding to the net with quiet precision and unshakable calm. Their clash wasn't just about trophies, it was about identity. What kind of tennis would define the future? And for a while, Edberg stood on top of that world, conquering Becker twice and rising to world number 1. But then, something strange happened. As the 90s rolled on, his name slowly disappeared from the spotlight. Today, when people talk about that golden era, they remember Becker, Agassi, Sampras, but rarely Edberg. So what really happened to the man who ruled Wimbledon with grace and silence? Let's rewind to where it all began, the making of a forgotten legend. Before Stefan Edberg ever set foot on center court, he was a quiet kid from a small town in southern Sweden, the kind who didn't scream, celebrate, or seek attention. He didn't need to. His tennis spoke loudly enough. At just 7 years old, he picked up a racket and began hitting balls against a brick wall for hours on end. No drama, no noise, just the rhythmic echo of precision being born. Sweden in the 1970s was a tennis powerhouse, still buzzing from Bjorn Borg's icy dominance. Every kid wanted to be like Borg, emotionless, efficient, untouchable. But Edberg was different. Where Borg built walls from the baseline, Edberg built bridges to the net. He played the game forward, charging in, slicing, volleying, a style that demanded courage and creativity. Coaches quickly noticed that beneath his calm surface was a fighter with surgical instincts. By 1983, at just 17, Edberg had already achieved something no one else in tennis history had, the Junior Grand Slam, winning all 4 junior majors in a single year. That record still stands today. It wasn't just talent, it was discipline, consistency, and a maturity that seemed decades beyond his age. Reporters called him the perfect student of the game. Fellow juniors said he never argued, never smashed a racket, and rarely missed a practice. He was the model professional before he even turned pro. But his rise came at a cost. The very qualities that made him great, humility, politeness, restraint, made him easy to overlook in a sport increasingly obsessed with personalities. When he joined the men's tour in the early 80s, the spotlight naturally gravitated toward louder, more flamboyant players. Then, in 1985, a bold teenage German named Boris Becker burst onto the scene, diving across grass courts, fist-pumping like a warrior reborn. Tennis suddenly had its new hero, young, explosive, marketable. Edberg didn't roar back. He just played his game, silent, sharp, relentless. His first major breakthrough came that same year when he won the Australian Open, proving that precision could still beat power. But while Becker became a media superstar, Edberg became something else entirely, the quiet craftsman, the kind of player whose brilliance you only noticed when you slowed down enough. He wasn't the loudest man on tour, but he was building something stronger, a legacy rooted in grace, not noise. And soon, destiny would bring him face to face with the man who embodied his exact opposite. And soon, that quiet fire would find its perfect contrast in a young German powerhouse named Boris Becker. By the mid-1980s, men's tennis was splitting into 2 worlds. On one side, the power revolution was coming, heavy rackets, booming serves, and baseline aggression. On the other stood a smaller tribe of artists, serve-and-volleyers who treated each point like a chess move rather than a brawl. Stefan Edberg was their quiet leader. Boris Becker, meanwhile, was the rebellion, loud, fearless, and unapologetically modern. Becker burst into superstardom in 1985 when at just 17, he dove and crashed his way to a Wimbledon title. He was raw electricity, the youngest champion in the tournament's history. Reporters couldn't get enough of his fiery charisma, his fist pumps, his power game. Brands loved him. Audiences adored him. Tennis suddenly had a rock star. Edberg watched all of this from a distance. That same year, he he captured the Australian Open, his own first Grand Slam title, but his win couldn't have felt more different. No showmanship, no headlines screaming sensation, just a calm smile, a handshake, and a trophy lift so understated it looked almost modest. While Becker sold intensity, Edberg sold purity, and in an era hungry for flash, purity didn't make front pages. Still, the tennis world sensed what was coming. Their games were mirror opposites that fit together perfectly. Becker was all explosive force, thunderous serves and diving volleys that electrified crowds. Edberg was poetry in motion, flowing footwork, soft touch, and effortless precision at the net. It was only a matter of time before they met under the brightest lights. Between 1986 and 1987, their paths intertwined again and again. Davis Cup ties, ATP finals, and early round showdowns. Each match was a study in contrast. Becker, the German storm; Edberg, the Swedish calm. Their duels were close, emotional, and tense, but never disrespectful. Even then, fans noticed something rare. They genuinely respected each other. There was rivalry without hatred, competition without chaos. Yet the tennis media loved to frame it as fire versus ice. Becker was chaos, Edberg was control. And the deeper they went in tournaments, the more inevitable their collision became. Becker's style drew the crowd's roars. Edberg's drew admiration. One looked destined for headlines, the other for history books. By 1988, destiny finally delivered what everyone had been waiting for. The quiet Swede and the fiery German, two players who couldn't have been more different, would face each other on the most sacred stage in tennis, the Wimbledon final. It was the beginning of one of the greatest trilogies the sport had ever seen. But as Edberg climbed to the top of the tennis world, the pressures of staying there and the toll of perfection began to show. When the summer of 1988 arrived, center court was ready for another Becker coronation. The young German had already won 2 Wimbledon titles, and most experts believed no one could stop him on grass. His serve was a cannon, his presence magnetic. But standing quietly across the net was Stefan Edberg, the calm Swede with a game built for the same stage, yet delivered in total silence. No one expected fireworks. They got history instead. The 1988 final was a masterclass in contrast. Becker thundered down serves that sounded like shotgun blasts, while Edberg floated forward, meeting them with feathery volleys that kissed the grass. Every rally felt like a duel between two tennis philosophies, brute force against pure timing. The crowd, torn between spectacle and serenity, watched as Edberg dismantled Becker's rhythm point by point. He wasn't overpowering him. He was outthinking him, outmoving him, outclassing him. In straight sets, Edberg claimed his first Wimbledon crown. No chest beating, no scream. Just a soft raise of the racket, elegance triumphing over chaos. But Becker wasn't built to fade quietly. A year later, in 1989, he returned to Wimbledon like a man possessed. The rematch felt personal. This time, Becker's aggression broke through Edberg's calm surface. His returns were sharper, his volleys fearless. Edberg, struggling with consistency and nerves, couldn't find his usual rhythm. Becker crushed him in straight sets, a brutal reversal of the previous year's script. The headlines the next morning screamed, "Becker back on his throne." The rivalry was now perfectly balanced, one victory each, tension building toward an inevitable third act. Then came 1990, the decider, Wimbledon's dream final. For the third year in a row, the same two men stood across the net. The world watched, knowing this was more than a tennis match. It was the end of an era, the last great serve and volley showdown before the baseline power game took over. The match unfolded like a 5-act drama. Edberg surged early, taking the first 2 sets with precision, so crisp it bordered on surgical. Every volley seemed pre-programmed, every approach perfectly timed. But Becker wasn't done. He stormed back, unleashing serves and returns that shook the stadium, evening the match at 2 sets apiece. Suddenly, the calm Swede looked human. The crowd roared for Becker. Momentum had shifted. Then came the 5th set, a 50-minute masterpiece of nerves and control. Becker attacked relentlessly, but Edberg absorbed every strike with quiet composure. He didn't flinch, didn't frown, didn't blink. Point by point, he built a fragile lead. At 5-4, Edberg served for the championship. The tension was suffocating. 2 match points slipped away. On the third, he carved a perfect serve wide, followed it to the net, and knifed a crisp backhand volley past Becker's desperate reach. Game, set, and the trilogy. Edberg. The crowd erupted, not in wild chaos, but in admiration. Becker, exhausted, walked across the net and embraced him. two warriors acknowledging the end of something special. It wasn't just another Wimbledon final, it was the final chapter in a rivalry defined by respect, artistry, and mutual greatness. That day, Edberg lifted his second Wimbledon trophy, but more importantly, he lifted the spirit of a dying style, a reminder that tennis could still be beautiful without being loud. For 3 unforgettable years, Becker and Edberg gave the sport its purest form of balance: power versus poise, emotion versus composure, chaos versus calm. When the grass settled, Edberg had won 2 of those 3 finals, and the rivalry had entered tennis folklore. Yet ironically, that same calmness, that same grace that made him great, would soon make him easy to forget. As the sport evolved toward power and spectacle, Edberg's quiet dominance began to fade from the collective memory. But in those 3 golden summers, Stefan Edberg didn't just win matches, he defined an era. And then, just as Edberg seemed untouchable, a new generation began to rise, bringing a style of tennis that would slowly make his own extinct. The 1990 Wimbledon victory wasn't just a trophy. It was a coronation. Stefan Edberg had climbed the mountain not through noise or chaos, but through composure and craft. In an age obsessed with power, he proved that patience, balance, and elegance could still conquer the game's loudest giants. For the first time, the soft-spoken Swede stood at the very top of the tennis world. But what made Edberg's achievement even more remarkable was how quietly he did it. By the early 1990s, he wasn't just the world's #1 in singles, he'd also reached #1 in doubles, a feat so rare that only a handful of players in history could claim it. Most champions specialized. Edberg mastered both dimensions of the game. He wasn't chasing spotlight moments, he was building a complete legacy. His serve and volley style became a thing of beauty, a throwback to purer days. On grass, he moved like silk. On hard courts, his precision and timing were weapons few could read. Even on slower surfaces, his discipline and fitness kept him in the hunt. And through it all, he never changed. No racket smashes, no tantrums, no theatrics. When younger players lost their temper, Edberg simply straightened his collar and played the next point. That quiet discipline earned him not only trophies, but also deep respect across the locker room. Between 1989 and 1992, he captured 2 Wimbledons, 2 U.S. Opens, and the 1992 U.S. Open final against Pete Sampras, a match many consider one of his finest displays of precision under pressure. He spent 72 weeks as world #1, trading the top spot with Lendl and Becker, yet never losing his composure no matter the pressure. The ATP created a sportsmanship award to honor players who represented the best of tennis values, and Edberg won it so often that, after his retirement, they literally renamed it the Stefan Edberg Sportsmanship Award. That alone says everything about the man's reputation. But fame doesn't always follow virtue. While Edberg ruled the court, the media's attention drifted elsewhere, toward the rising heat of Agassi's charisma, the raw power of Sampras, and the intensity of a new American generation. Tennis was becoming flashier, louder, faster, and though Edberg kept winning, his quiet excellence didn't trend. He was the perfect champion for a fading era, graceful, humble, unshakably calm. But in a sport racing toward television drama, that perfection slowly turned into invisibility, and soon the cracks would begin to show. Before he said goodbye, though, he gave fans one final chapter, a farewell that reminded everyone why he was one of a kind. By the mid-1990s, the sport that Stefan Edberg once ruled was shifting beneath his feet. The age of serve-and-volley was dying, replaced by baseline powerhouses, armed with graphite rackets and explosive topspin. As players like Andre Agassi and Pete Sampras redefined tennis with raw athleticism and relentless aggression, Edberg's graceful artistry began to look like a relic of a fading era. His impeccable volleys, his fluid movement, his quiet demeanor, once symbols of mastery, were suddenly overshadowed by speed, spectacle, and sound. Edberg's decline wasn't dramatic or scandalous. He didn't rage at officials or announce a shocking retirement. Instead, he faded with the same quiet dignity that had defined his entire career. His last seasons were marked by respectable results, but not the deep Grand Slam runs fans had come to expect. When he finally walked away in 1996, there were no fireworks, no farewell world tour. He simply left the game as gracefully as he had played it, shaking hands, bowing his head, and disappearing from the spotlight. And yet, in that silence, something profound was lost. Edberg's legacy was never built on noise or drama, and in the media-saturated world of modern tennis, that worked against him. He wasn't a showman like McEnroe, nor a rebel like Agassi. He wasn't the machine-like dominator that Sampras became. He was the gentleman of the court, a player whose mastery lay in touch, timing, and temperament. But those virtues rarely make for viral highlights or headline stories. When people today recall the legends of that golden era, names like Becker, Lendl, Agassi, and Sampras dominate the conversation. Edberg's name, curiously, surfaces less often, yet his impact remains quietly woven into the DNA of the sport. Roger Federer, perhaps the ultimate modern heir of Edberg's artistry, has repeatedly cited him as a childhood idol and even hired him as a coach decades later, seeking to revive that same net-charging elegance. In Federer's poise, in his calm under pressure, you can still see echoes of Edberg's influence. So why does Edberg feel like a forgotten legend? Perhaps because he represented something timeless in a sport that thrives on the timely. His was an era of grace over grit, precision over power. And when the world moved on, he didn't chase after it. He simply let it go. But for those who remember, his legacy remains a quiet monument to a purer form of tennis. A reminder that sometimes the most enduring greatness doesn't shout, it whispers. But retirement didn't mean the end of Edberg's story, because years later he'd quietly returned to tennis, not as a player, but as a mentor to one of the greatest of all time. Time, as it often does, softened the edges of nostalgia. For years after Stefan Edberg's retirement, his name floated quietly in the background of tennis history, admired by purists but rarely invoked in mainstream conversation. Then, something remarkable happened. As the 2000s unfolded, a new generation began to look backward, searching for inspiration beyond power and spin. And there, in the elegant shadows of the past, they found Edberg again. It started subtly with Roger Federer's rise. Federer not only shared Edberg's Swiss-like precision and calm, but also his deep appreciation for the aesthetics of the game. When Federer brought Edberg into his coaching team in 2014, fans suddenly saw the return of the classic serve and volley, reborn in flashes of beauty on the world's biggest courts. Every time Federer charged the net at Wimbledon, every time he carved a perfect backhand volley, it was as if Edberg himself had stepped back onto center court. Their partnership wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. It bridged eras, reconnecting modern tennis to the art and humility of the past. Beyond Federer, Edberg's influence can be seen in the growing appreciation for sportsmanship in tennis. He remains the only player to have won the ATP's Stefan Edberg Sportsmanship Award multiple times, and then to have the award named after him, an honor that speaks volumes about his reputation among peers. The award, now synonymous with fair play and integrity, ensures that Edberg's values live on, even if his matches have faded from the collective memory. In recent years, tennis historians and fans alike have begun to reassess Edberg's place in the game's lineage. His 2 Wimbledons, 2 U.S. Opens, and 2 Australian Open titles mark him as one of the most balanced champions across surfaces. His rivalry with Boris Becker, those 3 unforgettable Wimbledon finals, stands as one of the purest displays of contrasting styles in sports history: power versus grace, fire versus composure, chaos versus control. Watching their duels today feels like rediscovering a lost art form, and perhaps that's what makes Edberg's legacy so enduring. He didn't just play tennis, he elevated it. He made the court a canvas and his racket a brush. In a sport now dominated by analytics and muscle, his legacy reminds us that tennis, at its core, is still about feel, rhythm, and respect. The world may have forgotten his name for a time, but greatness like his never truly disappears. It simply waits quietly for the world to remember. And yet, even after helping another legend rediscover his greatness, Edberg himself remains curiously underappreciated. Which raises the final question: why does a man so great remain so easily forgotten? So, what does Stefan Edberg mean to tennis today? In an age where power rules and personalities dominate headlines, Edberg's calm presence feels almost alien, a reminder of when humility and elegance were enough to make someone unforgettable. He wasn't built to sell controversy or command attention. He was built to play beautifully. And that, ironically, is why he risks being forgotten by the casual fan. His greatness wasn't loud. It was earned quietly. But to the players, coaches, and purists who study the game, Edberg remains a blueprint of perfection under pressure. He showed that you could win without intimidation, that confidence didn't have to come wrapped in arrogance. Every aspect of his approach, his respect for opponents, his impeccable preparation, his emotional restraint, set a gold standard for professionalism. When Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic praise respect for the sport, they are, knowingly or not, echoing Edberg's philosophy. His influence goes beyond trophies or rankings. He helped define an ethos, a way of being an athlete that values grace as much as grit. Even in defeat, Edberg carried himself with the kind of composure that inspired fans to love the sport itself, not just the outcome. His legacy lives in the handshake at the net, in the moment a player helps his opponent up, in the quiet acknowledgement that rivalry and respect can coexist. Off the court, Edberg's post-tennis life also reflects his nature. He didn't chase media deals or celebrity endorsements. He retreated to a peaceful life in Sweden, investing wisely, mentoring quietly, and staying close to family. When he speaks publicly, it's rare, but always meaningful. There's an authenticity to him that feels almost extinct in modern sports. In the end, Stefan Edberg's story isn't just about tennis. It's about the value of subtlety in a world obsessed with noise. It's about proving that character, not just charisma, can define a champion. He may not headline the highlight reels, but his shadow stretches long over every generation that values beauty in the game. So when we look back at those epic duels with Becker, those poetic volleys on the grass of Wimbledon, and that serene face walking away from the game at his peak, we see something rare. An athlete who didn't just win titles, but embodied the soul of tennis. And maybe that's why Stefan Edberg still matters, because in a sport that often celebrates the loudest, he remains the quiet reminder that true greatness never has to shout.